She thought she was alone. No voices, no roads, no service, just a cabin buried in silence, and the kind of grief that makes every breath feel borrowed. That's why she came, to disappear, to survive the stillness. And for 3 days, the forest gave her what she asked for. Until the morning she opened the back door and found a single paw print in the mud. No barking, no movement, just one perfect print. Fresh, facing the woods. She told herself it was a stray, a coincidence. The wild had its own rhythm. But the next morning, there were 2, then 3, always alone, always pointed toward the trees, never returning. And then, on the 5th day, she saw him. A dog with no collar. Thin, silent, still, like he'd stepped out of a memory she didn't know she had. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know what he was protecting her from. But something else was out there. And this dog, the one who kept showing up without a sound, was the only one who'd already seen it. The first footprint wasn't supposed to be there. It curved in the mud just past the deck, fresh and sharp. One single paw print where none should be. The forest had been still. The cabin, quiet. No barking, no growling. Just that one mark. Watching them. It was the first morning Mia let herself make pancakes. The batter crackled gently on the skillet. The scent of butter and warm sugar filled the tiny wood kitchen. Outside, mist clung to the mossy tree trunks, and raindrops tapped softly against the window pane. She poured a second cup of coffee. No music, no phone, just the soft creak of wood and the hush of wind. The kind of quiet she thought she needed. This was her brother's favorite place. A cabin they had only shared twice, but he had returned to again and again. Now it was hers. His journals still lined the shelf above the fireplace. His coat still hung behind the door. She couldn't bring herself to touch them. She sat cross-legged on the old couch, plate in her lap. The bite of syrupy pancake lingered in her mouth when something shifted. A feeling like being watched. She turned toward the window. Nothing, just pines and fog. But when she stepped outside with her mug, the air changed. The kind of stillness that held breath. That's when she saw it. A single muddy paw print on the back deck. Larger than a cat. Not shaped like a bear. No claws. Too neat. She stared at it for minutes, blinking in the cold. She told herself it must have been left earlier, before the rain. She waited, listening, holding her breath. But the forest gave her nothing back. The next morning, there were 2. One on the deck. One just past the tree-line. Mia crouched beside them. They were fresh. The mud hadn't dried. Still no sound. Still no animal. By the 3rd day, she began waking earlier. 5 o'clock. For 30, 3:50. She waited in the dark, peeking through the curtain. Fog curled through the trees like breath. Birds were silent. She made no noise. At 6:10, something moved. Just beyond the swing of the porch light, a shape shifted between the ferns. Low to the ground. Careful. She held still. Her breath trembled against the glass. And then she saw him. Thin, gaunt, black and tan fur like ash on coal. Eyes wide, shining. A German shepherd, or something close. No collar. No tag. He didn't bark. He didn't run. He just stood there, looking at her like he remembered something he wasn't supposed to. She stepped outside slowly, barefoot, mug still in hand. The wet wood chilled her toes. He didn't move. She whispered, "Hey," not even sure why. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. The dog blinked once. Then he turned and walked away. No hurry. No panic. Just fading into the woods like smoke into air. She didn't sleep that night. The fire crackled dryly in the hearth, but the warmth didn't reach her hands. She sat at the window until morning, waiting, hoping. The next day, she left food by the edge of the woods. A half sandwich, a small tin of chicken. She watched from inside. The food sat untouched for hours. At dusk, she blinked, and it was gone. By the 6th day, he came closer. Not much. 10 feet maybe. She whispered to him, told him about her brother, told him she wasn't afraid of the dark anymore, but she didn't know what to do with the light. She told him his name could be Echo. He didn't react, but he stayed. They kept that rhythm, mornings and evenings. She'd bring food. He'd bring silence. She told herself it was nothing, a stray, a habit, but it felt like prayer. Like he knew when her breath hitched, and when her tears were about to fall. Like he understood the weight people didn't see. One night, thunder rolled across the hills. She stepped onto the porch to call for him, but the woods were empty. Rain soaked the ground, erasing every footprint before they could dry. She called into the trees, voice breaking. Nothing came back. He didn't return the next day, or the one after that. She followed trails through the underbrush, pushing past nettles and slick roots. Her arms scratched, her boots caked in mud. She called for hours. Her voice turned hoarse. Her hands shook from cold and panic. On the third day of his absence, she climbed the hill toward the old fire tower. Something in her chest pulled her there. A memory maybe, or a fear, and that's when she heard it. A soft whimper. Not bark, not howl, just pain. She ran. Near the base of the tower, half hidden beneath brush and broken branches, she found him, tangled in old wire. His back leg twisted, fur matted with blood and dirt. He lifted his head weakly when he saw her, but he didn't make a sound. She dropped to her knees, heart in her throat. She spoke to him gently, over and over, her hands trembling as she worked the wire loose. His body shook with each touch, but he didn't snap. He didn't flinch. He just let her be there. When the last loop of wire came free, he tried to stand. Collapsed. So she carried him, down the slope, through the mud, every step a gasp of effort. Her tears mixed with rain. Her arms screamed with weight. But she didn't stop. Not this time. The cabin door slammed open with her shoulder. Echo was weightless and impossibly heavy in her arms, a bundle of soaked fur and shivering breath. She laid him gently by the fireplace, hands numb and stained. He didn't lift his head, just blinked once, then closed his eyes. She whispered his name again and again. Echo, Echo. The sound bounced against the stone hearth like it was begging not to disappear. She worked without thinking. Blankets from the couch, towels from the bathroom. She turned the fire high, boiled water, opened canned broth, tried to remember everything her brother had taught her about wilderness wounds. Keep him warm, keep him awake, stop the bleeding, talk to him, even if he can't talk back. He whimpered once when she pressed a wet cloth to his leg. She said sorry, again and again, until her voice gave out. She didn't sleep that night. She lay on the floor beside him, one hand resting gently against his side to feel the rise and fall of his ribs. Sometimes it paused too long. Sometimes it felt too slow. Each time, her heart threatened to break open. Morning came gray and silent. The forest was hushed, like it knew something had changed. Echo stirred, just slightly. His nose twitched toward the broth she held in a chipped bowl. She helped him drink. For days, that was their world. The fire, the quiet, her voice, his breathing. He couldn't stand yet. She carried him outside, cradled against her chest, for brief moments when he needed the earth beneath him. He hated it. She could feel it in the way he tensed, how his pride bristled through every trembling muscle. One morning, she found him standing, wobbly, shaking, but upright. He looked at her like it wasn't worth celebrating yet, like it hurt too much to pretend this was over. But she smiled anyway, because she needed it. She needed hope to have a shape again. He walked 3 steps that day, 5 the next. A week later, they made it to the trail that curved behind the cabin. Mia whispered the name of each flower, each bird, the wind, the moss, her brother's name, once. Echo never looked away from her. The forest began to open again, and Mia let it. She found herself laughing once when Echo sneezed so hard he fell over trying to catch a butterfly. It came out cracked and rusty, like a hinge that hadn't moved in years. But it was hers. The footprints returned. 2 sets now, always together, always side by side. She started journaling again. Not much, just little moments. The way he curled up next to her feet when she read. How he followed her without being asked. How he growled, just once, when a hawk swooped too close above her head. He protected her like he had always been meant to, like the woods had carved him for her. Summer deepened. The trees grew heavier with green. Wildflowers spilled across the trail edges. Echo's fur thickened again, glossy in the sun. He chased squirrels and let her win tug of war. He slept beside the door, nose always pointed out. But sometimes, just sometimes, he flinched at thunder. And every time he did, she reached for him before he could run. before he could disappear into the silence he used to live in. She told him he didn't have to be afraid anymore. Not alone. One afternoon, while fixing the rotted step on the back porch, she heard it again. A low growl. She turned fast. Echo stood frozen, ears sharp, nose lifted. The fur on his neck bristled. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring past the trees, toward the ridge. Mia stepped closer, hand brushing his shoulder. He didn't move. Then he barked. Short, loud, fierce. The first time she had ever heard his voice. Something cracked deep in the forest. A twig? A foot? It was distant but real. She held her breath. Echo took a single step forward. Muscles tensed. And then nothing. Just wind. Just leaves. He kept staring for a long time. That night, Mia checked every lock twice. Pulled the curtains. Lit the fire even though it wasn't cold. Echo didn't sleep. He paced between windows, ears alert. She didn't ask what he had heard. She knew better than to pretend the woods were empty. The next morning, the footprints weren't just by the cabin. They were around it. Circling. Crisscrossed. Deep. Too deep for pause. She didn't step outside right away. She stood at the window, holding the curtain open with 2 fingers, her heart clicking fast like a second hand. The prints were clear. Deep. Bigger than Echo's. Longer. Heavy enough to sink clean through the wet pine needles and leave the soil visible beneath. They circled the cabin in a loose, winding loop. Some were close, just feet from the door. Others angled away like whoever, or whatever, had second thoughts. Mia's breath fogged the glass. Echo growled low again, that same quiet vibration in his chest. He stood beside her without touching, waiting for her to move, to speak, to understand. She opened the door anyway. The forest met her with silence. Not just quiet, but that strange, holding kind of silence. The one that usually came before storms or after screams. She stepped onto the grass barefoot, the morning dew sharp and cold. Echo followed, slow and deliberate, his head lowered, tail stiff. He sniffed each print carefully. No barking, no panic, just alert, focused. The footprints weren't human. Too wide at the top, long in the middle. For toes, maybe 5. But wrong. The heel was narrow, clawed. No shoe tread. Nothing she could name. They circled the cabin once, then led back into the woods. Toward the creek. Mia crouched low, brushing her hand over the edge of one. The soil was still damp. It hadn't dried. Whatever made them came through during the night. She whispered Echo's name. Not a command, just a thread of sound to keep her tethered. He didn't look at her. They followed the trail, past the ferns, past the crooked pine that always looked like it was bowing. The prints grew farther apart, like whatever it was had started running. Mia moved carefully. Step. Breathe. Listen. The creek gurgled up ahead, steady and slow. A dragonfly darted past her shoulder. Then she saw it. Another set of prints. Smaller. Dog-shaped. Echoes. But they weren't from today. They were old. Weeks maybe. Faint, but unmistakable. She recognized the pattern. The way he limped when his legs still hurt. The shallow angle of the toes. They ran beside the deeper prints, sometimes overlapping. She stood frozen in the moss. Echo had followed this thing before. She knelt, heart in her throat, fingers tracing the dry echo of his past steps. He'd come this far and turned back. Or been taken. She didn't know. The idea of him lost out here without her, wounded and silent, made her stomach twist. Echo whined softly beside her. When she looked up, he wasn't watching the ground anymore. He was staring at the other side of the creek, into the trees. There was nothing there. And then she saw it. Just a flicker of movement. Dark. Low. Gone before she could blink. She stood slowly, breath shallow. The forest held its breath with her. She whispered, "They're still here." Echo's tail dropped. His body stiffened. She didn't follow the prints any farther. Not yet. They walked back in silence. Every twig cracked a jolt in her spine. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper. Echo kept glancing behind them, watching the woods instead of the trail. Back at the cabin, she scrubbed the dirt from her hands, water scalding hot. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale, distant, eyes wide like she was seeing herself from somewhere else. She checked the windows again, the doors. She made coffee she didn't drink. left the lights on even though the sun was up. Echo lay by the door, head resting on his paws, ears twitching every time the floor creaked. That afternoon, she gathered supplies. Just in case. Flashlight, knife, rope, compass, cans of food, a flare her brother had left in a drawer. She didn't know what she was preparing for, but she knew something had changed. The cabin no longer felt like it belonged to the trees. It felt borrowed, watched. She opened her brother's old journal, the one he always left here. Dust floated off the pages. She flipped through sketches, notes, trail maps, mushroom drawings, bird lists. Then something caught her eye. A paragraph scrawled fast, crooked handwriting, like it had been written in a hurry. Saw the prints again. Not a bear, not a coyote. I don't know what it is. I followed them to the ridge. Something followed me back. Didn't sleep that night. Echo kept growling. I thought I heard. The sentence ended there. She turned the page. Blank. The rest of the journal was empty. Just those words. Just the name. Echo. She blinked. No, it couldn't be. Her Echo? It wasn't possible. She flipped back to the first page. A date. 3 years ago. Her Echo wasn't born then. He had been a stray, a rescue, a ghost, hadn't he? The pages trembled in her hands. 3 years ago. The date circled in her brother's handwriting pulsed like a wound. Her eyes scanned the words again, slower this time. Not just the footprints. The mention of Echo. His name, clear as breath on glass. She looked at the dog sleeping by the door. He was curled into himself, breathing deep. He hadn't moved since she sat down with the journal. But now, as if sensing her gaze, he lifted his head and looked at her. No sound, just that steady, silent awareness he always carried. She whispered his name. He blinked once. No confusion, no tilt of the head, like he already knew. She wanted to believe it was coincidence. A common name, a chance similarity. But the name had come to her out of nowhere, hadn't it? The first time she saw him. A whisper in the woods. A shape in the fog, like it had been waiting. She flipped through the journal again, past the birds and the ferns and the sketches of deer tracks. Back to the maps. Her brother had traced trails with different colored pens, green for marked paths, blue for creeks, red for places he shouldn't have gone, but always did. Near the back, a new symbol, a circle with a slash, a warning, labeled only with the word, hollow. She'd never heard of it. She ran her finger along the map. The hollow was past the ridge, tucked between two old trails that hadn't been maintained in years. She remembered once asking her brother why he never camped out that way. He hadn't answered, just changed the subject. She folded the map, grabbed her pack, and laced her boots tight. Echo stood the moment she did, already at the door before she reached it. He didn't bark. He didn't wait. He was going with her. They left the cabin just past 2 in the afternoon. The sun filtered through the canopy in long strips. Dust floated in the light. The trail to the ridge was steeper than she remembered. Or maybe she hadn't taken it since her brother passed. Maybe she avoided it for a reason she didn't understand until now. Echo moved quietly. His ears never stopped scanning. Every time a twig snapped, he paused. Every time she hesitated, he looked back to wait. The air thinned as they climbed. Near the top, they found the old fire tower again. The same one where she had found him hurt months ago. This time, it was empty. Still. But something about it felt wrong now. Like it was watching too. She took the left path, the one not marked on park maps anymore. Her brother's red line traced it all the way to a notch in the hills. The hollow. They crossed into it as the light began to shift. The temperature dropped. Not cold, but hushed. No birdsong. No insects. Just whined through dead branches. The trees here were older, taller. Their trunks blackened in places like they'd been scorched long ago. The underbrush thinned. The sky narrowed. Then she saw them. Prints. Deep. Wide. Just like before. But here, they were everywhere. Not one trail. Dozens. Spiraling. Doubling back. Crossing over themselves. Like something had wandered here endlessly. Or many somethings. She crouched to study one. The soil was soft, almost too soft. The print felt unnatural. Like it wasn't pressed, it was pulled. Echo didn't step forward. He stood just behind her, low to the ground, his tail tucked. His gaze wasn't on the tracks. It was on the tree line ahead. She turned slowly. Something stood between the trees. Not a shape, not a figure, just a darker part of the dark. Her eyes strained to find its edge. Her chest tightened. She didn't breathe. It didn't move. But she felt it see her. Echo growled. The thing vanished. Not turned. Not ran. Just gone. She staggered back, tripping over roots. Echo pushed his body in front of hers. Protecting. Solid. She whispered, "We need to go." Her voice cracked in the middle. Not from fear. From knowing. They didn't run. Running felt wrong. It felt like invitation. So they walked. Steady. Measured. As they neared the ridge again, she glanced back once. No prints. All of them were gone. The prints were gone. Not covered. Not faded. Erased. Like the ground had been smoothed by invisible hands. She stood frozen at the edge of the hollow. Echo pressed close to her side. His breathing was sharp now, quick through his nose. The fur along his back stood stiff and straight, a line of fear she could see even without touching. Mia turned away. The path down from the ridge felt longer than the climb. The trees crowded in tighter. Branches that hadn't touched on the way up now scratched at her shoulders, her pack, her arms. Echo moved ahead now, always 3 steps forward, then stopping to look back, making sure she was still there. By the time the cabin came into view, the light was bleeding orange through the trees. The porch was still. The windows reflected the sky. For a moment, it looked like everything had returned to the way it was. But she knew better now. Inside, she dropped her pack and locked the door behind her. Echo went straight to the far corner, curled tight, eyes still open. Mia lit every lamp. She built a fire, even though her shirt stuck to her back with sweat. She took the journal out again and laid it on the table, fingers tracing the same sentence over and over. Saw the prints again. Something followed me back. She opened her own notebook, wrote everything she had seen. The prints, the hollow, the thing between the trees. She wrote it fast, without stopping, as if writing it down would make it real, make it small enough to name. But when she finished, she couldn't bring herself to read it. That night, she tried to sleep. The fire snapped and hissed. Shadows danced across the ceiling. Echo never closed his eyes. At 1:15 in the morning, he stood up. No growl. No bark. He walked to the door. Mia sat up slowly, heart pounding. Echo stood still, nose pointed at the wood like he was listening to something inside it. Then, softly, he pawed the door once, like he wanted her to open it. She moved without thinking, stepped barefoot across the cool floor, stood beside him. The doorknob felt colder than it should. She didn't open it. Not yet. She leaned close and listened. Silence. Then something new. A sound so faint it almost wasn't there. Breathing. Not her own. Not Echo's. Something outside the door. Slow. Deep. As if whatever stood there had no need to rush. She backed away. Echo stayed. She whispered his name. He didn't move. The breathing faded. Then came a knock. Soft. Just once. A knock. Her whole body locked. Her voice vanished in her throat. She grabbed Echo's collar, pulled gently. He resisted, just for a second, then stepped back with her. No more knocks. No more breath. She stayed awake until morning. Sat in the corner with a flashlight in one hand and her brother's flare in the other. Echo beside her. Not sleeping. Not blinking. The next morning, there were new prints. Not around the cabin. On the porch. One single trail. Leading away. They began at the door. Clear, sharp impressions. Each step perfectly defined in the morning light. The wood still held the weight of them. Damp, dark patches trailing down the steps and onto the dirt. Mia didn't touch them. She only stared, arms wrapped around herself, skin still cold from the night. Echo stayed just inside the doorway. His nose trembled, but he didn't move. It was like he knew stepping into those tracks meant something he couldn't undo. She knelt by the edge of the porch and studied them. Same shape, same impossible curve. Whatever it was hadn't left in a hurry. The steps were even, deliberate. No scuffing, no slipping, like it had known where it was going. She whispered without meaning to. Why would it knock? The forest didn't answer. For the first time since arriving, she thought about leaving. About packing the essentials, tossing them in the old Jeep, and driving until there were no more trees. But Echo wouldn't understand. He belonged to this place in a way she couldn't yet name. She stood slowly and looked at the trees. They waited. That afternoon, she did something different. She followed the prints. They led down the trail, past the split where she used to gather kindling, past the edge of the dry creek bed, deeper into the woods than she had ever gone alone. The trail twisted in slow, quiet ways. Echo walked close at her side, never running ahead. The forest thickened. Shadows fell faster here. After 40 minutes, the print stopped. She crouched beside the last one. Then she saw it. On the tree ahead, just above her eye level, long gouges in the bark. 3 parallel lines. Clean, deep, as if carved by something with purpose. She reached out and touched one. The bark crumbled slightly beneath her fingers, still soft, still fresh. She turned to Echo. He stood frozen, not at the tree, at something behind her. Her breath caught. She turned slowly. Nothing, but she felt it again. That presence, that gaze. Like the air behind her was thicker than it should be. She stepped back toward Echo. His tail was tucked tight, eyes wide. He nudged her leg once. Not fear, urgency. They walked back in silence. The prince didn't reappear. That night, she locked every door, closed every curtain, lit the fireplace, and sat on the floor, knees to her chest. Echo rested beside her, his body pressed close enough she could feel his breath on her skin. She whispered to him, told him she didn't know what they were walking into, told him she was scared, told him she wouldn't leave him, even if the forest asked her to. His head lifted at that, just slightly. And then, outside, the wind picked up. Except it wasn't wind. It was whispering, not words, just breath, sliding around the cabin like it was looking for a way in. She held her breath. The fire hissed low. Echo growled once. A single sound, sharp as a snap. And then the whispering stopped. Instantly, the air went still. Her ears rang with the silence that followed. She didn't sleep. By dawn, the fire had died. She stood and checked the windows. There were no prints. But there was something else, scratched into the frost on the outside of the glass. A single word. Echo. She didn't open the window, didn't breathe, didn't blink, just stared. The name stood frozen in thin, perfect lines. Not smudged, not sloppy, etched like someone, or something, had written it carefully, deliberately, letter by letter. E. C. H. O. She turned to him. He was already watching her. Not the window. Her. Like he had known she'd find it. She dropped to her knees beside him, both hands on his fur. His warmth grounded her, anchored her. She whispered, "What are you?" Her voice didn't shake this time. Echo didn't move. She sat with him until her knees ached and the frost began to melt. The name blurred first at the edges, then slowly disappeared as if the forest regretted showing too much. By noon, she packed again. Only what mattered. The journal, the flare, a flashlight, her compass, and her brother's map. Folded so many times the corners had worn soft. They would go back, not to the trail, to the hollow. Echo didn't wait for a command. When she slung the pack onto her shoulders, he stood and walked to the door. They left without locking it. There was nothing left inside to protect. The climb back to the ridge felt heavier. The trail curved in unfamiliar ways, though she'd walked it days ago. Trees leaned closer. Sunlight narrowed. By the time they reached the fire tower, the wind had picked up. Not fierce, just restless. The hollow welcomed them in silence. No footprints this time. No signs of life. But the trees still held that hush. The one that pulled your voice from your throat before you could speak. They stepped through slowly. Mia watched the ground. Echo watched everything else. The place looked different. Not larger, but deeper. The way dreams sometimes shift beneath your feet. Trees she hadn't noticed before leaned inward, forming a kind of arch above the trail. Moss clung thick to trunks. Roots twisted like ropes. They found the gouged tree again. The marks had darkened, edges curled like healing skin. Echo stopped. His nose lifted. She turned. Another shape stood ahead. Not hidden this time. It was tall. Too tall. Black where the light couldn't cling. Its arms, if they were arms, hung low, and its head tilted just slightly. Like it was curious. Mia couldn't move. Echo didn't bark. He stepped forward once. The thing took a step too. Not toward them. Beside. It moved between trees like watered-down stone. Mia's heart pounded, but she felt no threat. Just watching. Just there. She followed slowly. Echo at her side. They didn't speak. The thing never looked back. After several minutes, it vanished into the dark. And in its place, they saw it. A clearing. Circular. Perfect. The center burned bare, as if fire had lived there once. In the middle, nothing. No altar. No structure. Just a circle of scorched ground. And at the edge, half buried in leaves, something metal. She knelt. A dog tag, caked in rust and dirt. She wiped it with her sleeve. Echo. Her hands went cold. Her breath caught. The tag was her brother's handwriting, etched by hand. She remembered the curve of that E. He had written this. Not for a pet. For something else. For someone. Echo stepped forward and sniffed it. Then, without prompting, he walked into the center of the clearing and lay down. He didn't lie down like a dog claiming comfort. He lay down like someone returning to a place they never meant to leave. Mia stood at the edge of the clearing, the tag still in her hand. The metal pressed cold into her skin. Her fingers curled around it like it might dissolve if she let go. Echo didn't move. His body curled slightly, his ears low, but his eyes never closed. She stepped forward. The ground inside the circle felt different. Not soft, not hard, just empty, like the fire that once lived there had taken something with it when it left. She crouched beside him, placed the tag gently in the dirt. Echo didn't look at it. He only looked at her. And finally, she asked it out loud. Did you know him? Her voice barely carried in the stillness. Did you belong to him? Echo blinked once, slowly, then his head lowered to his paws. And she understood, not all at once, not in words, but in feeling. Her brother had come here, had found this place, had met something in the dark that didn't want to be feared. He had called it Echo, maybe as a name, maybe as a promise. She remembered his old journal, the sketches, the broken sentence. Something followed me back. He hadn't been afraid. He'd been trying to protect it. Protect him. She reached out and touched Echo's fur. He was warm beneath her hand. Solid. Present. But she could feel it now. Something different. Like he belonged to both worlds. Not just the one she lived in. He stood then. Walked once around the clearing. His steps were even. Measured. Like he was remembering something that wasn't hers to know. Then he came back and sat beside her. They stayed that way for a long time. At some point, she noticed the sun had shifted, slid low behind the trees. Shadows stretched long across the clearing. Time had passed faster here, or slower. She couldn't tell. Mia rose and looked once more at the dog tag. The letters were almost lost in the dirt now. She didn't take it. Some names belonged to the ground. As they left the hollow, Echo moved with a new certainty. Not faster, not slower, but complete. He knew where he'd been. And now, so did she. That night, back at the cabin, she built the fire higher than usual. Echo lay beside her, his breathing deep and easy. She opened the journal again, turned past the empty pages. On the last one, near the bottom corner, almost too faint to see, there was another line. In her brother's handwriting. He listens better than most people. Tell him I said thank you. Mia closed the book. She didn't cry. She just reached down and touched Echo's side. He looked up once, then rested his head on her foot. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. But the silence no longer felt like fear. It felt like memory. Mia started walking the ridge trail again. Not to search, not to chase shadows, but to be near. Each morning, she brewed her coffee, packed a small pouch of food and water, and followed the old trail toward the hollow. Echo never needed calling. He was always at the door before she was. They didn't go all the way every day. Some days they stopped at the fire tower. Other days they sat by the dry creek, watching dragonflies skim the water's surface. Echo would chase a few, then return to her side without prompting. He never strayed far. She spoke to him more now, told him stories, her brother's old jokes, bits of memories that had stayed buried until now. Things she never meant to share with anyone, but found herself offering to him in pieces, like threads in a quiet quilt. Echo never answered, but he was always listening. One afternoon, she brought the old tag with her. She had cleaned it gently. The rust still clung to the edges, but the name shone through now. Etched deep, permanent. They walked to the edge of the hollow, but didn't go in. Not today. She tied the tag to a branch just outside the clearing where the sun touched it in the late afternoon. It turned slowly in the wind, catching light, flashing like a signal. For him. For them. Echo sat beside her as she knelt and pressed her palm into the soil. "Thank you," she whispered. To her brother. To the forest. To whatever had led Echo back when she needed him most. The wind shifted. A soft sound passed through the trees. Not whispering. Not breath. Music. Only for a second. A low, resonant hum that made the hairs on her arms lift. Like the woods were singing, just beneath hearing. Echo raised his head, then lowered it again, calm. She didn't speak. There was no need. The next morning, when they returned to the porch, she found a new footprint in the frost. One single print. Small. Not paw. Not the clawed shape from before. A boot. Just one. Pressed into the corner of the step, like someone had stood there to watch. She crouched, stared at it, her heart slowing to something deeper. It wasn't old, but it wasn't threatening. Echo sniffed it once, then turned away. That day, she opened a new page in her journal. Not the one with her brother's maps. A clean one. She began writing again. Not warnings. Not fears. Just what the forest had given her. She didn't write the word echo. She didn't have to. It lived in everything now. Autumn came softly. The leaves changed in hushes, not bursts. Greens fading into amber, into firelight, into the hush of what comes next. The wind no longer felt watchful. It felt like breath, like the forest was exhaling after holding something too long. Mia walked each morning with Echo at her side. Their paths were less about distance now and more about rhythm. They knew the curve of every trail, the pause before each ridge, the spot where the deer sometimes watched them from behind branches. She had stopped checking the locks at night, not because the fear was gone, because it had changed. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was something softer. A presence. A weight. A knowing. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would hear a sound on the porch. A step. A scrape. Echo never growled. Never lifted his head. He only watched the door for a moment, then went back to sleep. She stopped asking who it was. Some visitors aren't meant to be met, only acknowledged. The day she found the second tag, it was hanging from a branch near the hollow, just below the first. This one older, darkened with time, the letters nearly worn away. But she could still make out one thing. M-I-A. She didn't touch it. She only stood there, her breath slow, her eyes full. She remembered a moment from years ago, before the cabin, before the loss, when her brother had carved her name into a tree behind their house. Just 3 letters. Quick, but it had stayed there long after he left. This was the same. Not a sign. A promise. She looked at Echo. He was watching her the way he always did. Not like a dog. Like something older. Like a tether to something just past the veil. She whispered, "I know." The trees swayed gently. That night, she sat by the fire and read from her journal. Pages full now of sounds, trails, moments. Of the stillness that had taught her how to listen again. Echo's head rested on her knee. His breath warm through the flannel of her pajama pants. She didn't feel alone anymore. Not even when the wind rose again. Not even when a shadow crossed the porch and paused by the door. She only whispered goodnight. Echo lifted his head once, then closed his eyes. And the forest listened. And the hollow waited. And the footprints, those strange, silent gifts, were no longer warnings. They were markers of where love had been, of where it still walked.
Truly are the most loyal companions in our lives. What did you think of this heartwarming story? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next story of love, loyalty, and the incredible bond we share with our pawsome friends.